Hello. In this video, I'm going to show you what to do against White's main line in the King's Indian. So after the moves d4, d6, knight f3, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, White goes e4. This is the main line uh, in the King's Indian defense. White is seizing the whole center. Now, of course, if you're a King's Indian player, you can go castle, and there's plenty of theory. However, for this course, we're going to recommend a rare sideline, but bishop g4. This move has a clear strategical idea. We want to trade the bishop for the knight and then push e5. We're hoping to that after White blocks the center to go h5 and trade the dark squared bishops. And here we're going to see several replies. Bishop e3 makes sense to reinforce d4. Then there is queen b3 to target b7. h3 just to force the events. And the main move, bishop e2. First of all, we start with bishop e3. This is actually one of the two main moves. It's very principled, and White is reinforcing the d4 pawn. And we go knight c6. Again, this is quite a rare move. It will also add the benefit of surprise. Our idea is to go e5 and fight for the center. And in some lines, we'll need to sacrifice a pawn in order to get piece activity. Now there is d5 and bishop e2. Bishop e2 is the more natural move. However, whenever we go knight c6, White may be tempted to push d5 to prevent us from playing e5, and also this comes with tempo. We can go knight e5, and this is a good square for our knight because of the pin. Bishop e2, getting out of the pin. Knight f3, knight takes f3. Now the knight on e5 was exposed, so we trade it. And now we're going to see bishop f3 and gf3. Bishop f3. With this move, White keeps the pawn structure intact. We take, and this trade is good for us because we don't have so much space, so then the lack of space is not felt anymore. Queen f3, castle, castle, and knight d7. Of course, we want to keep our bishop active, and here we have different plans. For example, c6 to challenge White's center. There is also a6, yeah, and even some more unusual idea like bishop c3 to double White's pawns, and then follow up with e5 is possible. Let's say White continues with rook ac1 to activate the rook and stopping these bishop c3 ideas. And here we can go a6. This is a strange little move. But we have the plan to push c5 and then b5. And Although we don't have so much space, this is not really not felt at all because we traded two pair of pieces and we have breaks in the center. Even c6 is possible. So I think black is fine here. G takes f3 is probably more ambitious, trying to keep more pieces on the board. But like this, white damages the pawn structure, and here we can play bishop h5. The bishop may seem stranded here, but it's actually quite active. We are always hitting the pawn on f3. White has to keep the bishop on e2. And at the same time, it's safe for us to castle short because white doesn't have ideas with h4, h5. The bishop is there blocking all kind of attack on the king. And so, of course, castle is part of our plans. Afterwards, we can play c6, typical move to challenge white center, maybe open up the c5 later on, queen a5 then, and so on with a comfortable position. So white goes bishop e2. Usually white goes for this. And this was played in almost all of the games. Very logical move, addressing the pin, completed the development. And here we follow our strategical idea. We take on c3, on f3, sorry. We can implement this idea via different move order. Also, e5 is possible, and it leads to the same thing: d5, bishop f3, and now knight d4. And this will transpose. But let's say bishop f3, we take immediately bishop f3. And now we need to fight for the d4 square. This is essential, so we go e5. And we need to hurry up with this, otherwise white could go d5 and we won't have e5 anymore. So e5 is there. Now white's only way to fight for an advantage is d5. After we took on f3, white doesn't have good control over the d4 square, so d5. And here is an important moment. We need to sacrifice a pawn with knight d4. The knight goes forward. We're going to take white's dark square bishop in return. So that will be our compensation. It's very, very bad to retreat the knight backwards. And it leads to a strategically lost position. For example, queen e7. Of course, white has several moves, but I like the move g4 here, gaining even more space. And this is the kind of positions we want to avoid. Knight d4. And most likely white will just take the pawn. But we'll also see this move knight b5. Of course, this was rarely played. White tries to keep the dark square bishop, but still to get rid of our knight on d4. And here the most precise move is to just castle, ignore everything. And of course, we're going to see what happens after knight takes d4, but also castle preparing knight takes d4. So knight takes d4 is very tempting, e takes d4, and bishop d4 is the move. Queen d4 looks wrong, and it is wrong because it allows us to go knight g4, attacking the queen, and then we can take the bishop on e3. Also, white has to be careful about the pawn on b2. So queen d4 doesn't make sense. Bishop d2, bishop takes d4 is the move. And of course, now if white has time to consolidate, you'd just be a pawn up. And it's important he managed to keep the dark squared bishop, but we can strike in the center, and this is a typical motive. We can strike straight away. And now we're going to see bishop g7 and bishop e4. All the possible captures, for example, bishop e4, taking the knight, and here important move is queen h4. We are attacking the bishop on e4, and very important, we are preventing white from playing f3 because of this pin. And of course, rook e8 will come next. Castle. It's time for white to bring the king to safety. If white is trying to defend the bishop on e4, let's say with queen d3, we just go rook e8 already with a better position. And bishop g7 here is not good because we go queen e4 with tempo and we winning material. Now the king is, there's a check, there is option to go queen g2. So white castles, we just take on e4. We got our piece back and the position is about equal. Yeah, don't forget about queen h4 here. Bishop takes g7. Here white is trying to trick us, and if he manages to do this, he could be a piece up. And the only good move here is rook e8. We have now this threat knight c3 check, and white is trying to parry all the threats with queen d4. And now the easiest move is knight f6 check, just to take the bishop on g7, king d2 to bring a rook to e1, but now we just take the bishop, and the position is equal. Well, we still need to be careful about ideas of g4 and g5, but we can just drop the king back to g8 and it's just fine. And if anything, we slightly prefer black's position here because potentially the knight can be better than the bishop. So let's see castle when white now really threatens to take on d4. And we take on f3 with check, queen f3. And why was it important to include castles? Is because now white doesn't have the option to castle long and attack our king. We can go e6 here to remove the knight from its active position, knight c3, then knight d7. Now we are ready to push f5. And we get a good counterplay here. We can continue, let's say, with f4, then push the g pawn, and we get typical King's Indian counterplay. But it's quite unlikely you'll face knight b5 over the board. Of course, white can just take the knight, pawn takes, queen d4. Now white's queen is exposed on d4, but there is no good way to take advantage of this. And we can castle. We're already threatening knight d4 now with rook e8 pinning. White can also castle. Queen d2 would be just the same because we can go knight d7, castle, and queen f6 transposing. So let's say white castles, and now knight d7. We want to open up this bishop. And here our minor pieces are more active than white's pieces, but we are a pawn down. However, I have to say this dark square bishop on g7 is really great. Now we're going to see queen d2 or queen d1. It's hard to say which square is better, but on d2, the queen at least looks developed. Queen d1 is also possible though, although it looks less logical. And it even has an idea if we go queen f6, maybe white wants to go g3 when the bishop on f3 is defended. So that would be a difference. Here I like this move h5 to just a prophylactic move. This is against the idea of g3, bishop g2, and f4. And it's also limiting this bishop. It's taking away the option to go to g4. Rook c1, a good prophylactic move, just to bring the rook into play. Now it takes us all the options to take on c3 with the bishop. If white continues with g3, here we can take on c3, bc3. Now white has a worse pawn structure, but still nothing to complain since it's a pawn up. But queen f6, and then rook a8 with a great play on the king side. The queen side is blocked, and we'll have maybe great square on c5 for the knight. And this looks good. So rook c1 makes sense. White is in no hurry anyway. And here we can switch the plans and go queen g5. This move is a bit available now since white doesn't have the queen on d2 anymore. And of course, our queen is active on g5. Rook c2. Simply improving the position, defending the b2 pawn in case white wants to move the c3 knight. Rook a8. And now we can maybe play on the king side. We have more active pieces, whereas white is a pawn up, but it's on the defensive. And also, the thing with white's position here, I don't see a clear plan. There is a extra pawn, but apart from that, I don't see a clear plan. And because of these active pieces, I think black has great compensation. But in practice, I would prefer to be black here. Queen d2 is the more logical retreat, actually, to cover the dark squares a bit, also stopping ideas of bishop c3. And here we can reinforce our pressure on the long diagonal. Also, we are preventing g3. Okay, here we're going to see rook ac1 and rook ad1. Each of these moves has some advantage. Rook c1 looks very natural, maybe defending the knight on c3 in advance. So that, let's say if we go knight c5, now there is b4. Also, white could have a threat like bishop g4. Okay, again, this h5 move is good, just to take away the g4 square for the bishop. And now white is trying to improve the light squared bishop. Maybe go to a4, for example. If we put some rook to e8, then bishop a4 is there, and white can trade the bishop for the knight. But here we can even offer a queen trade with queen d4, and it turns out the endgames are also fine for black. Let's say white takes on d4, hoping to take advantage of the pawn in the endgame. If queen e2, we can go a6 just to stop knight b5 and then knight c5 and so on. We have a good compensation here. So let's see what happens in the endgame. Bishop d4. And here, even if we are pawn up, we have pawn down, sorry. We have a good compensation because of the active pieces, and the idea is to go knight c5, put some pressure on the e4 pawn. Also, there are various ways to improve the position, for example, h4, king g7, and so on. Are all options to be considered. So even the endgame of pawn down is fine for black. And there is this idea, rook a d1, to keep the rook more central and also to prevent queen d4. The knight belongs to c5. We go for it. Now there is no more b4. We add some pressure on e4, and white's bishop will be stuck on f3. Our plan is to gradually improve the position of our pieces with rook e8, then a5 or a6 or a5. We can, okay, maybe I like this idea with a6 and then to prepare rook a b8, prepare b5 to get some active play. In the meantime, white doesn't have a constructive plan here. So I think although we are a pawn down, black's position is easier to play, and also objectively, there is no way for white to take advantage of the extra pawn. Let's go back. Now let's see queen b3. We always need to consider this move because we just moved the light squared bishop, and there is a question about the b7 pawn, how to defend it, if we defend it. We're not going to defend it. We're not really concerned about it right now. We just go for quick development with castle. And here we're going to see e5 to act in the center, and of course queen takes b7. e5 was tried in the game Morozov-Makovey in Vinnytsia 2016. White still wants to take on b7, but first of all to attack this knight on f6 to dislodge it. And yeah, another point of this is after white takes on b7, if we take on f3, then we won't double the pawns because white can take back with the queen. D takes e5. It's good to open the position since the white king is still in the center. D takes e5 and now knight e8. It looks like a bad square for the knight, but in this instance, in this given instance, it's the best square. And now, okay, we want to take on f3. Then e5 could be a target. Knight c6 is there. Um, so if white doesn't take on b7 now, we go knight c6 anyway. So let's see what happens if white takes on b7. This is not the best, but we need to know why. We defend the a8 rook with the knight d7, completing that development, and now white is in trouble because he was too greedy. He wasted too much time in taking the b7 pawn, while not developing, and now the king is stuck on in the center on e1. Bad news for white is he's going to lose the e5 pawn, and then he won't even have extra material. This was e5, and we need to consider also queen b7. Since white played queen b3, it makes sense to grab the pawn. Knight b d7. We're defending the rook, completing the development, and now we are ready to strike with e5 or c5. In the meantime, the white queen is exposed on b7. So let's say white is bringing back the queen to safety. And c5, we want to open up the position since we have a better development. And again, white is in danger here. The king is on e1, and he will have to fight hard to stop our initiative. Then there is the move h3, which we are happy to see because we wanted to take on f3 anyway. Well, with this move, white wants to force us, and we take it. Of course, we take it. We don't go back. And now we're going to see queen f3 and gf3. Queen f3 is the natural recapture, keeping the pawn structure intact. However, with this trade, the d4 pawn is weakened, and we can immediately attack it with knight c6. Now white defends the pawn, because if d5, the knight jumps. The knight is happy to jump in the center. And then queen d1, knight d7 to support this knight. And here black has a nice lead in development. We can follow up with e5 or c5, but black's position really looks good. So bishop e3, let's say white is defending the pawn like this. And again, we're fighting for the d4 square with e5. And we're going to take control of the d4 square later on. And already this is more comfortable for black. So g takes f3. And this is possible, but it's probably better to take like this than queen takes f3. But many players would refrain from this because of the worse pawn structure. And also the h3 move is not really useful for white. And here we can just complete the development with knight b7. And then we want to go knight h5. And afterwards we'll be ready to push either e5 or c5. f4. White is setting the pawns in motion. Knight h5. This is the maneuver I mentioned before. Bishop e2, white is targeting the knight. And here we need to react quickly. Obviously, we don't want to allow white to take on h5, so c5 is the right way. Just striking in the center, putting more pressure on d4, and obviously black is fine here because white wasted this tempo with f3. Now, of course, if white takes on h5, there is the in-between move c takes d4. And what else if white goes d5? We can include bishop c3. And then we'll have a much better pawn structure. And the same for d takes c5. We still take on c3. So this is h3. Now let's move on to bishop e2, white's main move to just address the pin. Most likely we're going to face this move over the board. And we take on f3, although it was not, the bishop was not attacked, but we follow up our plan. We want to weaken the d4 pawn, and then we'll be ready to push e5 to strike in the center. And now we're going to see both recaptures, g takes f3 and bishop f3. G takes f3 is interesting, but since white played bishop e2, it's quite unlikely that your opponent will go for it. It's not a bad move. It has a point. Now white is stopping us from pushing e5 because if we go e5, can take, and queen d8, king d8 and f4. And white is opening up the position now. So here we found this move, knight fd7. It's important to remember this move. We're opening up the bishop and we want to go knight c6 to attack on d4. Here we're going to see bishop e3, which is the most natural, but f4 is probably the better move to stop e5. So bishop e3, this is a very natural move, reinforcing the d4 pawn. Now, since white cannot trade the queens anymore, e5 is good. And we want to follow up with knight c6, so white has to do something about it. And we're going to see d takes e5 and d5. d5 is the more principled reply. If d takes e5, white releases the tension in the center. D takes e5, queen d2. The idea is to castle long, of course, since the kingside structure is compromised. Knight c6, the knight is heading towards d4. Long castle, and this was played in Budisavljevic Draškovic in Ivy League 2022. Here black had a strong maneuver to aim for the d4 square with knight f8. And the idea is to go knight e6 and then completely control the d4 square and also f4. And after this move, black's position would already be preferable. In that game, black played immediately knight d4, which is tempting. That was also fine, but knight f8 was more to the point. So d5. And now we go a5 to secure the c5 square for our knights. we want to go knight a6 afterwards and so on. It's not so good here to go knight f6 immediately because of c5. So we need to keep the knight on d7. Here I think it's good for white to go h4 to try to trade this pawn with h5. Of course, we don't want to allow this, so we go h5. We don't have time to go knight f6 again because of c5. So h5, queen d2. Of course, the typical idea to castle long. Knight a6, long castle, and queen e7, just finishing the development. And now we want to go either knight dc5 or knight ac5, then bishop f6 to target h4. Okay, we're not going to take the pawn. White will not give us this pawn. White will play bishop g5, but then it's not clear how white will proceed further. And in these positions, white always has to defend the h4 pawn. So this is an unclear position with chances for both sides, but on the long term, the h4 pawn could be a weakness, or maybe even the double pawns on f2 and f3. f4 is a good move because white is stopping us from playing e5. And the idea is if we go e5 now, white can take, getting rid of the double pawn, and then to play d5. So we go knight c6, attacking the d4 pawn. And here we're going to see bishop e3 and e5. Bishop e3, white just wants to keep the center, reinforce it, and now he has options to push d5 or e5 at the right moment. But now we can finally strike in the center with e5, because if white goes d5, we jump to d4. So of course, white first of all gets rid of the double pawns. If e5, d5, d5. This is the principal move, gaining some space. If white takes on e5, then the position opens up. It's true that white has the bishop pair, but we have good control over the dark squares. And we can follow up with queen h4, then long castle. Also, we have control over d4, so black would be fine. d5 is the principal move, and of course we jump knight d4. And here white managed to get rid of the double pawns, but we got this very nice knight on d4. And we have ideas, let's say, to go c5 to further support the knight. a6 is possible to stop white from playing knight b5. At some point, of course, we can even castle. Let's not forget about the king. So this is good for black. I think black has enough counterplay here. Basically, if white wants to get something, he shouldn't allow this knight on d4. So e5 is principled because it's shutting off this bishop. And here We go e6 to fix the pawn structure, and now we'll have ideas with 97. Also 97 and then 95 to reroute this knight. Also, there is a, if white doesn't do about anything about it, we just want to take on e5 and then follow up with queen h4, preparing long castle, and that looks great. So here we're going to see bishop e3 and h4. Bishop e3 doesn't do anything about this idea of queen h4. So just to show you what happens if white develops normally, we take on e5. It's important to do this in order um, to prevent white from opening the game with d5. So that's why we take on e5. Now f takes e5 is a more ambitious move. If white takes with the d pawn, then we can break the center right away with the f6. So f takes e5, at least white again got rid of the double pawns, but now we jump queen h4, and I really like this resource. And we want to greatly activate our pieces with the long castle. Let's say white goes queen d2, also with the idea to castle long, and we castle long. And I think black has very good counterplay in this unclear position. Of course, there is a threat of knight d5 that white needs to stop. The position is very double-edged. We're not worried about bishop g5 here because d4 pawn would fall, and then all of white's position will fall apart. So this is good for black. White has to be careful and stop us, and h4 is the move to achieve that. Now it's essential also to stop white from pushing h5. White wants to do this, so we need to play h5, bishop e3, finishing the development. Knight b6. We are rerouting this knight. Queen c2, let's say. Of course, this is a new position. There are no games here. There is also a4 with the idea to hit the knight with a5. But here we can just go d5 and get counterplay. So queen c2. Now we reroute the other knight, and it's going to f5. From there we can attack the weakness on h4. White will have to take care of it. Also in 97 we are stopping white from pushing d5. Position is very unclear, and probably white should stop us from playing knight f5 with bishop d3. And here we have this interesting resource, d5, c5, knight c4. We're sacrificing a pawn. White should probably take it. D takes e5, queen a4, queen d7, queen c4, and now castle. Our king is safe here. And here we have good compensation for the pawn. White has this dark square bishop, which is defending on d4, on f4, but it's also lacking perspectives. And we have squares like f5, d5 will be able to bring rook on d8 and so on. So these positions are always double-edged, and white needs to be prepared quite good to enter this. Now we're going to see Bishop f3, which is the natural move. White doesn't want to spoil the pawn structure, and this was played in almost all the games. White is playing for some small edge because of the bishop pair. But we were expecting this. We go e5, fighting for the center. We want to follow up with knight c6. And here we're going to see d takes e5, bishop e3, and of course d5. d5 is, again, the more principled move. D takes e5 is possible. White wants to trade the queens and then play the endgame. So let's see. D takes e5, queen d8, king d8. This endgame is fine for black, but we still need to be a bit careful. And here we're going to see bishop g5, g4, and bishop e3. Bishop g5 is a logical move. White wants to pin this knight, and also there is an idea to go long castle to it comes with tempo, bring the rook into play, and so on. We need to stop the white from playing knight d5. This is very important move, c6, to control the critical squares d5 and b5. Okay, d5 most of all. Long castle, the logical follow-up, and now king c7. We want to get out of the pin. And just don't go knight d7 here because you lose a piece after bishop f6, bishop f6, bishop g4. There is no way to save the knight, so don't fall for that. Instead, avoid the pins, and king c7 is good. The king is safe there. It's a good place for the king. And now we want to go knight bd7, then maybe h6 or even h5 with idea bishop h6 again to trade the dark squared bishops. And on the long term, we have this d4 square, and we want to plant a knight there. So the endgame is fine for black. Also notice that this bishop on f3 is lacking perspectives, and white doesn't have good control over the d4 square. The pawns cannot go back. g4 is an ambitious move just to take away our options of h5 and also trying to go g5. But here we have knight c6, and the knight can just jump to d4. We have enough time to do this. And once the knight reaches d4, the bishop on g7 is doing a great job defending, supporting the knight there. So black is fine. That's why probably the more logical move is to play bishop e3 to control d4 square and follow up with the long castle. In here you need to remember this move h5. This is important. We want to stop white from pushing g4, g5. And also at the right moment, later on, we can play bishop h6 to trade the dark squared bishops and get rid of the bishop pair and so on. White goes long castle. We can parry the check with knight bd7. Of course, we want to follow up with c6 to stop knight d5, then bishop h6, and so on. White can go knight d5, well, he still can. Otherwise, afterwards, we go c6, and the knight will be restricted there. And here, the easiest solution is to just take on d5. to see how white takes back. And now if rook d5, we just go c6, king c7, the position is equal. Or if white goes cd5 instead, then we can trade the dark squared bishops. And we'll have an endgame with knight versus bishop, and the knight is slightly better in this endgames because white has a pawn on the same color as the bishop. So here, probably the position is about equal, but slightly preferable for black, of course, because of this knight versus bishop thing. Bishop e3 is an attempt to keep the center intact, defending pawn on d4, and this will transpose to bishop e3 early on instead of bishop e2, so we go knight c6, d5, and knight d4, and it transposes. d5. This is the logical move. White is stopping knight c6. And here we go h5. This is an important move. Without it, our strategy doesn't make sense. We want to, of course, first of all, we want to stop white from playing g4. And there is also the idea to trade the dark squared bishops with bishop h6. And, well, this is the starting position of this line. It's very likely you'll get this on the board. And here I'm going to cover many moves, but the ideas are the same. So castle is very natural. h4 makes sense. Bishop e3 to just develop the bishop. Bishop g5 to pin us. b4 to push on the queen side. And finally queen b3 to annoy us. So let's see, castle. This is the most natural continuation. White is, first of all, putting the king to safety, and then he can see what he's going to do. Here, we're in no hurry to go bishop h6. First of all, we can go knight bd7, and I like this move when we can include it, because now white doesn't have ideas with the c5. And also, we like this, we want to see what white is doing. Now there is bishop g5, rook b1, and h4. Bishop g5 doesn't make so much sense. This pin is really not doing anything, and we can just gain a tempo with bishop h6 here. We're going to trade the bishops. And then what was the purpose of bishop g5? This happened in Krstulovic, Nenezic in Bajna Basta 2023, where black successfully implemented all the typical plans in the position, like king f8, king g7, a5, and so on. And he won a nice game. Rook b1 is at least trying to do something useful, since the bishops will be traded anyway, but white is preparing before. Bishop h6, since we are also running out of useful moves. Bishop h6, we want to, this is the strategical idea in the position. Bishop h6, it makes sense to go for this trade because now the rook will be misplaced on h6. But of course, we want to go king f8, king g7, then rook h8. And although it takes time, white cannot really do much in the position, and we will improve the position of our pieces. Queen d2, this comes with tempo, rook h8. And now, of course, since white played rook b1, it makes sense to follow up with b4. Seizing more space on the queen side, but it won't be easy for white to push c5. c5 is what wants to do, but it's not easy to get there. King f8, the king is heading to g7, and you can see that in this line the plan is very simple. We have a sound strategical plan. Okay, white has a bit more space, but it's not easy to do something more now. So here black is just doing great. Finally, let's see h4. The idea of this is to follow up with the g3, then maybe white can reroute the bishop to g2, bishop h3, and so on. We can go e5. This is useful. We are waiting for white to move the dark square bishop so that we play bishop h6 and gain a tempo. G3, white just continues the plan to improve the bishop with bishop g2, bishop h6, h3. Now finally bishop h6 is happening. Again, white takes on h6 in order to force our rook on h6, where it's quite passive. Queen d2, connecting the rooks with tempo. And here in the game, Hess against Leon, played in Austrian League in 2023. Of course, Leon played rook h8, which is the natural move. The game ended in a draw, although Leon had his chances at some point. But we can even improve on that game with rook h7. This move is not really obvious, but the rook controls h7, f7 pawn. So now we're going to be better prepared against f4 push. Let's say bishop g2, and here we can even fianchetto the rook. This idea is quite rarely seen, but here it works. The rook is defending f7 so that f4 is not strong. And later on we can even prepare some g5 ideas. For example, here white cannot go f4 because we just take, and since f7 is defended, afterwards, for example, if white takes with a queen, we can jump to g4, and then some knight to e5 with a great position. So let's say sample line could be rook ae1. White is still trying to do something on the king side, but then we can go king f8, bishop h3, knight c5. Finally, white goes f4, but we can just go queen e7, and there is no, white has no way to add more pressure on the e5 square. So black is fine here. This was castle, which is very natural. Now let's see h4. White is seizing some space on the king side, and at the same time he's keeping options to castle long. Of course, then there is the idea to go g3 and so on. First of all, we play knight bd7 just to see what, maybe white moves the dark square bishop, so then we play bishop h6 and gain a tempo. g3, white is defending the h4 pawn in advance, and now he wants to reroute the bishop to h3. Bishop h6, we need to play this move. This is our main strategical idea. Bishop h6, rook h6. Again, the rook is slightly misplaced on h6, but we're going to bring it back. Queen d2, hitting the rook. And here we need to go back to h8. This plan with rook h7, which worked in the previous line where white had castle, it doesn't work here anymore because white can castle long. So rook h8. And here in the Blitz game, Lequang Liam played long castle. Of course, now the king, again, the king is heading towards g7. And in these positions, it's important to not to play a5 because we will block the position. Instead, since white castle long, we want to go a6 and b5 in the future to open up the queen side. So this is very important. We need to keep the position flexible on the queen side in order to be able to get an attack. King b1, always a useful move. King g7, we're doing the same. Now there is a position with the opposite castle kings, and white will try to open up the game on the king side, and will try to do the same on the queen side. On the here we can play our following moves could be a6, knight c5, and b5. Even if we sacrifice a pawn, maybe it's a good idea to open up the play on the queen side. Of course, the position is double-edged. I mean, there are kings on different flanks. So bishop g2, let's say, just a sample line. A6, f3. White is trying to somehow make g4 work. Knight c5, and we can follow up with queen b8, and then finally push b5. So black is fine here. Bishop e3 is not really precise because we are gaining a tempo. We just go bishop h6, the main strategical idea to trade the bishops. We need to hurry up with this because white wants to follow up with queen d2, and then bishop h6 will not be possible anymore. Bishop takes h6, rook takes h6. And here we're going to see queen d2 and queen b3. Queen d2 is a very natural move. We just fall back with the rook to h8. And now let's say white is fixing the pawns on the king side with h4. Wants to follow up with g3. Knight bd7. Black gets a comfortable position. We even gain the tempo because white played bishop e3. We want to connect the rooks with king f8 and king g7. Then queen e7. And okay, it's typical in this kind of positions to open up the play with the c6. Also, if white allows it, another plan could be to push a5 and knight c5. So it's good to know the plans in these positions. Here it's even better that we get an extra tempo, but usually if you know the plans, you can already make many moves in this position, and white will have to think and try to find ideas, and there is no clear plan for white. Queen b3 is a move where white is trying to create weaknesses in our camp. Queen c8 is essential here. We don't want to go b6 because then it won't be easy for us to go c6. And we would weaken our light squares on the queen side. So that's why queen c8, a4. White is just seizing more space on the queen side. But white has to be very decided to play like this. And this move also contains a trap. Because here, if we play the very natural move a5, white can play c5. And now this is good. Even though we win a pawn, but then white can castle long, and we won't be able to open up the queen side anymore. So we want to avoid this, just go king f8 here. We want to regroup our pieces with king g7. First of all, bring the king to safety. And then activate the rook h8, and so on. a5. Now we don't have the option to go a5 anymore. King g7, but we just follow our plan. Castle, rook h8, mission accomplished. We don't want to play with bad pieces. And now we want to go knight bd7. Even c5 could be an idea. Let's say white goes queen a3 to push b4. And then finally prepare c5. We finish the development with knight d7, b4. Finally, white is ready for c5, but we can play c5 ourselves. And now white needs to take a decision, either to allow us to block the queen side, or if he takes on c6, then white is giving up the e6 square and will be able to play knight f8, knight e6. And anyway, black has an easy to play position. So this was bishop e3. Now let's see bishop g5. This can lead to the same positions as bishop e3. We're following up with bishop h6. And of course, if bishop h6, then it transposes to the line we saw previously. So bishop f6 can make a difference here. This move has a distinct value. Now queen f6 and queen b3, targeting the b7 pawn before we manage to coordinate the pieces. Now the only way to save the pawn is to go b6. And we want to follow up with knight d7. So if white wants something, he needs to go c5. A pawn sacrifice. Again, it's not an easy decision for white to do this. I don't see many players just sacrificing this pawn for nothing. Of course, now white is threatening c6. We don't want to see c6 on the board, so we take with the d pawn. Knight b5. White is targeting the c7 pawn. There is also an idea to push d6. And here, well, the position already became very sharp. The best move is to go king d7. This move is necessary, but afterwards black is fine. So now we want to attack this knight with a6. And okay, we have an extra pawn. White has to do something. We can counter d6 with the knight c6, and like this we can stop white's counterplay. The knight can go to d4 later on. It's a very unusual position, this one, and white needs to prove compensation for the pawn. b4 is way too premature. Of course, white is preparing to push c5 and so on, but we can just go a5, and now we're going to gain access to the c5 square. White has to make a concession here. The only way to keep the structure intact is to go queen a4. Black gets very comfortable position after b takes a5, rook takes a5, a4, knight is heading towards c5, knight a6, castle. Of course, we're implementing the strategical idea to trade the bishops with bishop h6, and then we have total control over the c5 square. So queen a4, let's say, queen d7. It was possible to stop this check in other ways as well, but let's go for this. a3, defending the pawn. And now we can just head for the endgame with queen a4, knight a4. And this was played in Michalik Jovanovic in Germany 2023. And black would just play knight bd7. Obviously, white's strategy to push b4 so early on just failed, and we can, for the moment, we can keep the pressure not to take on b4. We can follow up with king e7. Now the king is really doing great in the center. Then, of course, we can trade the dark squared bishop with bishop h6. Also, maybe there is even an idea to go rook a7 to double the rooks on the a file, and then to take on b4. So black is already preferable here. b4 is definitely a rushed decision. Queen b3 is interesting, and probably the most dangerous move. Is not an obvious move. White is immediately pressuring the b7 pawn. White's idea is to provoke b6, and if we go b6, then we cannot go c6 anymore. So that's what we're trying to avoid. So imagine if we go b6, then on the long term, white can reroute the bishop d1, a4, and control the light squares. So that's why we go queen c8 here, defending the pawn on b7, and now we want to follow up with knight bd7 and claim that the queen on b3 is misplaced. And again, white needs to know what he's doing. a4 is the move. We will also see c5 here, but c5 is not so good because we can just take it. Bishop e3, knight bd7. And yeah, c5 is a typical sacrifice, but here the queen side is not blocked, so there is no a4 and a5 included, so we can go later on a6 and b5 and open up the queen side if white castles long. And Leon won a game on the internet here against Leon with black against Martinez Reyes in 2023. So a4 is very refined idea. to push a5 and gain more space. And we want to stop white's counterplay with a5 here. And we're one move away from stabilizing the queen side with knight bd7, but white doesn't allow us. And c5 is the point of white's play. This is a really nice idea, and I still find it hard to believe, but it's like this. If we take the pawn, okay, knight bd7 is the good move, and it's what we recommend. If we take the pawn, this position is very bad for black. It takes some time to understand this. Also, yeah, it was difficult for me to understand that black is actually much worse here. But white can go bishop e3, knight bd7, long castle, and long castle. This was the game Bambuer against Nevednici in Sitges 2022. And here white can get an advantage after bishop e2. Black's main problem is that there is no counterplay on the queen side, since a4 and a5 are included. So this is what we want to avoid. But I have to say that white's idea is very deep. Knight bd7. Knowing about the idea, we're just going to refute it. C takes d6. This is the logical continuation to create the weakness on d6. We need to take c takes d6. Now knight b5 is the tempting move. If white plays bishop e3 here, this can lead to similar positions after knight c5, queen c2, and again king d7. So we're going to talk more about this with knight b5. It's very tempting to attack the d6 pawn straight away, and now obvious, or maybe not so obvious move, king e7, but it has to be played. This is a good way to defend the pawn on d6. The king is not quite safe on e7 on the long term. For now it is safe, but most important is that we manage to stabilize the position. We want to go knight c5, bishop h6 if possible. And here we're going to see castle and bishop d2. Bishop d2 has the idea to play, white has the idea to play bishop c3 and even b4 in some lines. Knight c5 comes with tempo, queen c2, and queen d7. We freed up this d7 square. This is very good for the queen. And we want to bring a rook to c8. Castle. We can try to trade the bishops here with bishop h6. Bishop c3 or bishop h6. We're not worried about bishop h6 because white takes. We take queen d2, rook h8, queen g5. This can potentially be the annoying idea for white, this pin on the knight. And the question is how to get rid of it. But now we're just in time with queen d8, and we want to move the king away. And if white goes rook fc1, then just b6 to reinforce the knight on c5. And then king f8, king g7, and black is fine. So if white goes like this, then she's probably going to save the bishop with bishop c3. And now we can just consolidate, defend the pawn on a5 in advance, consolidate the knight on c5. And well, white managed to keep the bishop pair here, but our bishop on h6 is very active. You can compare it with the bishop on g7, where it wasn't doing much, but now on h6, well, white doesn't have rook c1, doesn't have f4, and so on. And here, of course, we can follow up with h4. Maybe the king can get to g7, or even put some rook on c8, depending on what white does. Again, it's quite an unusual position, and I like very much this knight on c5 here. I think black is doing fine here, really. So this was bishop d2. I'm going to consider briefly also bishop e3, because this is very natural. But we just follow up with the same plan: knight c5, queen c2, b6. Again, we need to consolidate the knight on c5. And we can follow up with queen d7 and so on, bring a rook to c8. No problems for black. And now finally, let's see castle. Obviously, here white is going to castle short. So he may as well do this. And white is leaving the bishop on c1. He wants to, if we play bishop h6, white wants to take on h6 in one move, not to waste time. Knight c5, this comes with tempo. We're attacking the queen and we want to be able to play queen d7. Queen c2 probably is the most natural retreat for the queen. Queen a3 could be considered. For example, it looks a bit more strange. We do the same: queen d7, bishop e3, rook hc8, rook ac1, let's say, and now b6, again consolidating the whole queen side, and then we can follow up with king f8. So it's not clear what white is doing with the queen on a3. Queen c2 looks more natural. And queen d7. This is the useful move. We're keeping options to maybe at some point we want to play bishop h6, but also we want to bring maybe a rook to c8, depending on what white does. Bishop e3. And now rook hc8. And we are defending the knight on c5. And now we want to follow up with king f8, king g8, maybe. Okay, possible idea to go like this, bring the king to h7, and then maybe bishop h6 to trade the bishops. Here, black has no real weaknesses. We can also maybe consolidate with b6, like the usual idea. And we can hope for an advantage in the endgame if we trade the dark square bishops and then to play against this light square bishop. So these are the lines with these are the lines when white goes knight f3, we just go bishop g4. And this is a rare idea. Most likely white is going to play bishop e2 here. Bishop e3 you got it all covered with this pawn sacrifice after knight c6, bishop e2, takes, e5, d5, knight e4. And black has enough compensation here. It will be difficult for your opponent to prove something here, and he will most likely be on the defensive. And bishop e2 is the main move. We just take on f3. Most likely white is going to take with the bishop, then e5, d5, and h5. This is the typical position. And now this is not your typical King's Indian, but instead it's quite a strategical position. But you have, with black, you have a long-term plan to trade this dark squared bishops and go knight e7 and so on. Then bring the king to g7. And on the long term, maybe go a5, c6, queen e7, and so on. So here you are covered for the next moves, for the next many moves. And white's probably most ambitious way to continue is queen b3, but and this move queen c8, a4, a5, c5. But I think black is also fine here, so not it's not no reasons to worry even here. I just hope that after studying this course, you'll have great success in this line with bishop g4 and bishop f3, and that there will be more games in practice, and we'll see this line much more often. Thank you for watching.